moment her heart stood still from fear. Such a change took place in his face, though she says he did not move a muscle. Then, just when she was expecting from him some harsh or forbidding word, he wheeled abruptly away from her, and crossing to a window at his side, lifted the shade and looked out. When he returned, he was his usual self, so far as she could see. "There is a way," he now confided to her in a tone as low as her own, "but it can only be taken by a child." "Not by me?" she asked, smiling down at her own childish proportions. For an instant he seemed taken aback. Then she saw his hand begin to tremble and his lips twitch. Somehow, she knew not why, she began to pity him, and asked herself as she felt rather than saw the struggle in his mind, that here was a trouble which, if once understood, would greatly dwarf that of the two men in the room behind them. "I am discreet," she whisperingly declared. "I have heard the history of that door, how it was against the tradition of the family to have it opened. There must have been some very dreadful reason. But old superstitions do not affect me, and if you will allow me to take the way you mention, I will follow your bidding exactly, and will not trouble myself about anything but the recovery of this paper, which must lie only a little way inside that blocked-up door." Was his look one of rebuke at her presumption, or just the constrained expression of a perturbed mind? Probably the latter, for while she watched him for some understanding of his mood, he reached out his hand and touched one of the satin folds crossing her shoulder. "You would soil this irretrievably," said he. "There is stuff in the stores for another," she smiled. Slowly his touch deepened into pressure. Watching him, she saw the crust of some old fear or dominant superstition melt under her eyes, and was quite prepared, when he remarked, with what for him was a lightsome air, "I will buy the stuff, if you will dare the darkness and intricacies of our old cellar. I can give you no light. You will have to feel your way according to my direction. I am ready to dare anything." He left her abruptly. "I will warn Miss Digby," he called back. "She shall go with you as far as the cellar." Part 5. Violet, in her short career as an investigator of mysteries, had been in many a situation calling for more than womanly nerve and courage. But never, or so it seemed to her at the time, had she experienced a greater depression of spirit than when she stood with Miss Digby before a small door at the extreme end of the cellar, and understood that here was her road, a road which once entered she must take alone. First, it was such a small door. No child older than 11 could possibly squeeze through it. But she was of the size of a child of 11, and might possibly manage that difficulty. Secondly, there are always some unforeseen possibilities in every situation, and though she had listened carefully to Mr. Van Broeklyns's directions, and was sure that she knew them by heart, she wished she had kissed her father more tenderly in leaving him that night for the ball, and that she had not pouted so undutifully at some harsh stricture he had made. Did this mean fear? She despised the feeling if it did. Thirdly, she hated darkness. She knew this when she offered herself for this undertaking. But she was in a bright room at the moment, and only imagined what she must now face as a reality. But one jet had been lit in the cellar, and that near the entrance. Mr. Van Broeklyn seemed not to need light, even in his unfastening of the small door, which Violet was sure had been protected by more than one lock. Doubt, shadow, and a solitary climb between unknown walls, with only a streak of light for her goal, and the clinging pressure of Florence Digby's hand on her own for solace. Surely the prospect was one to tax the courage of her young heart to its limit. But she had promised, and she would fulfill. So with a brave smile she stooped to the little door, and in another moment had started on her journey. For journey the shortest distance may seem, when every inch means a heart-throb, and one grows old in traversing afoot. At first the way was easy. She had but to crawl up a slight incline with the comforting consciousness that two people were within reach of her voice, almost within sound of her beating heart. But presently she came to a turn, beyond which her fingers failed to reach any wall on her left. Then came a step up which she stumbled, and farther on a short flight, each tread of which she had been told to test before she ventured to climb it, lest the decay of innumerable years should have weakened the wood too much to bear her weight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, then a landing with an open space beyond. Half of her journey was done. Here she felt she could give a minute to drawing her breath naturally, if the air, unchanged in years, would allow her to do so. Besides, here she had been enjoined to do a certain thing, and to do it according to instructions. 3 matches had been given her, and a little night candle. Denied all light up to now, it was at this point she was to light her candle and place it on the floor, so that in returning she should not miss the staircase and get a fall. She had promised to do this, and was only too happy to see a spark of light scintillate into life in the immeasurable darkness. She was now in a great room, long closed to the world, where once officers in colonial wars had feasted, and more than one council had been held. A room, too, which had seen more than one tragic happening, as its almost unparalleled isolation proclaimed. So much Mr. Van Broecklyn had told her, but she was warned to be careful in traversing it, and not upon any pretext to swerve aside from the right-hand wall till she came to a huge mantelpiece. This passed, and a sharp corner turned, she ought to see somewhere in the dim spaces before her a streak of vivid light shining through the crack at the bottom of the blocked-up door. The paper should be somewhere near this streak. All simple, all easy of accomplishment, if only that streak of light were all she was likely to see or think of. If the horror which was gripping her throat should not take shape. If things would remain shrouded in impenetrable darkness, and not force themselves in shadowy suggestion upon her excited fancy. But the blackness of the passageway through which she had just struggled was not to be found here. Whether it was the effect of that small flame flickering at the top of the staircase behind her, or of some change in her own powers of seeing, surely there was a difference in her present outlook. Tall shapes were becoming visible. The air was no longer blank. She could see. Then suddenly she saw why. In the wall, high up on her right, was a window. It was small and all but invisible, being covered on the outside with vines, and on the inside with the cobwebs of a century. But some small gleams from the starlight night came through, making phantasms out of ordinary things, which unseen were horrible enough, and half seen choked her heart with terror. "I cannot bear it," she whispered to herself, even while creeping forward, her hand upon the wall. "I will close my eyes," was her next thought. "I will make my own darkness." And with a spasmodic forcing of her lids together, she continued to creep on, passing the mantelpiece, where she knocked against something which fell with an awful clatter. This sound, followed as it was by that of smothered voices from the excited group awaiting the result of her experiment from behind the impenetrable wall she should be nearing now, if she had followed her instructions aright, freed her instantly from her fancies. And opening her eyes once more, she cast a look ahead, and to her delight saw but a few steps away the thin streak of bright light which marked the end of her journey. It took her but a moment after that to find the missing page, and picking it up in haste from the dusty floor, she turned herself quickly about and joyfully began to retrace her steps. Why, then, was it that in the course of a few minutes more her voice suddenly broke into a wild, unearthly shriek, which, ringing with terror, burst the bounds of that dungeon-like room, and sank a barbed shaft into the breasts of those awaiting the result of her doubtful adventure, at either end of this dread no